Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Maureen Reedy, the President and CEO of the Paley Center for Media, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this very important PaleyImpact program. Tonight, we have the great honor of premiering for the first time in the United States the powerful documentary Reckonings, which documents the significant negotiations by German and Jewish leaders of the very first material reparations for Holocaust survivors. We are honored to host this premiere and the discussion that follows as part of the Paley Center's ongoing quarterly series to examine media's powerful shaping influence and unique ability to raise awareness around the growing crisis of anti-Semitism. More than 70 years have passed since the end of the Holocaust, and yet anti-Semitism is still visible, an increasingly dangerous reality in our society. This PaleyImpact series focuses on topics that shine a light on how media, in all its forms, can educate, inform, and make an impact on this vitally important issue. This series is made possible by Shari, Redstone, and Aryeh and Elana Bourkoff, whom we thank for their most generous support. And of course, we are extremely grateful to our partners at the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany for helping make this notable documentary, evening, and the reception that follows possible. You know, never before has Paley's mission been more vital, as media has been the undisputed connector to a nation in these unprecedented times. And Paley is uniquely positioned to meet this moment with impactful conversations led by influential leaders, such as those that we are truly honored to have with us today. On this meaningful occasion, the screening of Reckonings will be followed by a conversation with our distinguished panelists, who include Roberta Grossman, the writer, producer, and director of Reckonings. Abe Foxman, a Holocaust survivor and a world-recognized leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, bigotry, and discrimination as National Director Emeritus of the Anti-Defamation League. Michael Berenbaum, the renowned Holocaust survivor and director of the Siggy Ziering Institute. And Greg Schneider, the Executive Vice President of the Claims Conference since 2009. But to now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Gideon Taylor and Anton Klicks. Gideon Taylor has been president of the Claims Conference since 2020 and also serves as the Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York and Chair of Operations of the World Jewish Restitution Organization. We are honored to have him joined by Anton Klicks, the Consul for Political Affairs at the German Consulate General of New York. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Gideon and Anton. Gideon.
70 years ago, landmark agreements were negotiated between the newly formed State of Israel, the Federal Republic of Germany, which was the legal successor of the German Reich, and the Claims Conference, which had been formed by 23 major global Jewish organizations to negotiate on behalf of the world's Jewish Holocaust survivors. These agreements, without precedent in international law and diplomacy, not only laid the foundation for all subsequent compensations for Nazi persecution, but also showed the world what accountability can look like. The people who constructed these agreements, taking on the impossible task of determining how to compensate individuals for the unprecedented destruction and suffering that have been inflicted, showed the world what was possible. Those first negotiations are the backdrop for the movie Reckonings, brilliantly directed by Roberta Grossman. The film captures the weight carried by both German and Jewish leaders as they negotiated in secret under the constant threat of violence. What can we learn from this film? It tells us how reparations can impact a people, a country, a society. It explains that seeking reparations is complicated and hard. It shows us that reparations are not just about money, but more importantly, are a recognition of unimaginable pain and an acknowledgement of one of the darkest chapters in human history. We would like to thank the Paley Center for Media for partnering with us today to bring this screening to the United States. Thank you to the team at the Claims Conference, our panelists, the moderator for tonight's discussion, Rebecca Jarvis from ABC, and of course, most importantly, the many Holocaust survivors who have joined us this evening to be with us. We have greetings from the Consul General of Israel in New York, Asaf Zamir, who could not be here. And I'm pleased to introduce our next guest. Since the Luxembourg Agreements, the Claims Conference in Germany have been engaged in a continuous and unprecedented commitment to Holocaust survivors. We are particularly pleased to have with us, representing the government of Germany, Germany's Consul for Political Affairs, Anton Klicks. Anton.
Good evening. I feel very honored to be here tonight for the US premiere of Reckonings. The film tells the story of the Luxembourg Agreements, and they have a very special place in history. Only 7 years after the end of Second World War, there was a need for such an agreement, both morally and financially. The wise and courageous people from the states of Israel, Germany, and the Claims Conference who developed and negotiated these treaties knew this. But there were very many obstacles, as we will see later during the screening of the film, and perhaps in the discussion on the panel by the experts. I don't want to get ahead of this discussion, but one thing I found very symbolic in the film was how children and grandchildren of the authors of the Luxembourg Agreements were involved. This shows, as an example, compensation, remembrance in a wider sense, is an ongoing process and an obligation for generation after generation. Current developments in Europe prove this. Some of the survivors interviewed in the film needed the compensation for education. Nowadays, there is a larger need for home care. But either way, the work of the Claims Conference remains important. Thank you for this work. It is a great thing that your story, the story of the Luxembourg Agreements, and through this, the beginning of today's strong relationship between Israel and Germany, are now appropriately shown in this film, Reckonings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The panel discussion will begin immediately after the film finishes. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Karen Heilig. For over 20 years, I've had the privilege of participating in the negotiations for the Claims Conference with the German government. It has been my honour to spend my professional life working to secure assistance for Holocaust survivors, and I'm also proud that I was the first woman member of the Claims Conference negotiating delegation. It was almost 3 years ago at a screening of Who Will Write Our History that Greg Schneider had an idea and asked me to discuss making what was initially planned to be a 30-minute documentary with Roberta about the 70th anniversary of the Luxembourg Agreements. And that is how I ended up being the producer of the film. I was incredibly fortunate to work with Roberta Grossman, who has unparalleled creativity, vision, and patience, and this film could not and would not have come to life without her. Since my main job at the Claims Conference has always been negotiations, taking a second job as a producer could not have taken place without the support of my wonderful husband, Ivan, and my children, Elizabeth and Jeremy. I would like now to introduce two remarkable women who you saw in the film. Their bravery and resilience is an inspiration for us all. First, the very young 98-year-old Helena Weinreich, who is here with her dance partner, Slavi, and also Tova Friedman. Tova, please stand. Tova. Tova. I also want to take a moment to honour all the survivors, because we have a large number of survivors who are here with us today, in addition to Tova and Helena, and I'd like to ask all the survivors that are here today to stand. Stand up. These heroes survived the horrors of the following camps: Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen, Sachsenhausen, Liberosa, Gunskirchen, Strasov, Janowska, as well as the ghettos of Lodz, Warsaw, Yash, Lvov, Ternau, Tomaszów, Mazowiecki, and Shanghai. And those who were not in camps were in ghettos or living they were in hiding or living under false identity. They endured more than we can ever imagine, and we are honoured to have them here. We at the Claims Conference are committed to working with them and for them for the rest of their lives. I am now honoured to introduce the moderator for the panel for this evening. Rebecca Jarvis is Chief Business, Tech and Economics Correspondent, ABC News, and creator and host of The Dropout. I look forward to Rebecca moderating this evening. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you, and in particular to be here with you, Tova and Helena, and the survivors in the room for what I expect will be a wonderful conversation coming out of that film. So I'd like to introduce to all of you our renowned panelists. They include Roberta Grossman, whom you just saw in the credits there as the writer, director, and producer of Reckonings. Good, come on up. Abe Foxman, Holocaust survivor and National Director Emeritus of the Anti-Defamation League. Thank you, Abe. Michael Berenbaum, Holocaust scholar and historian. Thank you. And Greg Schneider, the Executive Vice President of the Claims Conference. So we just watched this remarkable film that had to have taken you, I see it in your eyes, so much time and energy and the thousands and thousands of hours of footage that existed. Why tell the story now?
Well, I think it was Karen who mentioned that I was here in this, I think in this room, showing my last film, Who Will Write Our History, when I spoke to Karen about the idea that the Claims Conference had of making a film that would capture this history. I've spent my whole life reading about, studying about, making films about the Holocaust, and I never knew about reparations. So it was a great opportunity for me. It was an honor to be asked to make this film, and it was a great opportunity to learn and to meet survivors, such as the ones you met in the film and are here tonight. Thank you for being here. And to help tell their story about what they went through after the war and how they began to rebuild their lives.
Abe, I wonder, given what Roberta just said about the general lack of knowledge around reparations, even people, young people who may study or may have knowledge of the Holocaust may not understand this process. What do you want future generations to know about this?
So absolutely, there's absolutely no knowledge. People know Germans are paying reparations, don't understand how difficult it was. And I think, Roberta, thank you as a survivor for showing and explaining how difficult it was for the survivors. I remember growing up, going to meetings of Holocaust survivors in the US, listening to the debates and the arguments. I remember the arguments around the kitchen table at home. My father said no, my mother said yes. So it's important from that perspective to remember and to understand. It took me a long time to visit Germany. It took me a long time to begin to reconcile. And I think that's the important message of the film. Yes, it tells a lot about history, it tells a lot about the difficulty, but it also focuses on hope. Mm-hmm. If Jews and Germans in 1952 can find the courage, the strength, the tenacity to come together for the future, then this is a lesson for everybody. Then there's nobody. Nothing is more horrendous than what this is all about. This is a people trying to destroy another people. And those people who survived are willing to come together with those who want. We're not talking about now, we're talking 1952. Yes, Adenauer was an exception, but the majority of Germans were the people who did it. And that's really the message. The message is you can overcome hate if you're willing to reach out and reconcile. And you don't have to forgive, and you don't have to forget, but you have to be able to face up to accountability, responsibility, not for the past necessarily, but for the future. And that, I believe, is the message.
A message like that really cuts through in an era like the one that we're living in. I would love to, if you wouldn't mind, go back to those kitchen table conversations between your mother and your father and the people that you knew. Take us back to that moment. What was that like to live through, to experience from your vantage point?
My mother won out. Thank God she did, because the financial help and the medical help was very, very important in the later years for them. But I will tell you that I still struggle with the issue. It's not over for me. After Bitburg, I went to Germany for the first time. And I remember going to the Bundeswehr University, which is the West Point of Germany, and a young cadet looking at me after I spoke about and he said, "But Herr Foxman, it's over." And I looked at him and I said, "I understand how much you want it to be over, because you're not responsible, you're not guilty, but you are responsible. And it's not going to be over for you till it's over for me. And it's not over for me. And it's not over for me, therefore it's not over for my children and my grandchildren." So we have to learn to understand that there is no normalcy. There'll never be normalcy. But again, as I said, we have to overcome it. When the claims conference several years ago expanded the compensation or Wiedergutmachung to hidden children, which cover me, I called and I asked for an application, but I never filed that application. I never filled it out. So for me, it is still a struggle around that kitchen table because, and I guess both Menachem Begin, who was opposed, and Ben-Gurion, who was for, and the claim conference who were for, they were all right. They all were right. Begin was right. This was the legitimacy document to the German people early on to enter the community of civilized nations. He was right. Ben-Gurion was right because Israel was a successor country of 6 million who perished. And the claims conference was right because it wasn't over, and it continues till now. Not only successive governments since Adenauer for the last 70 years have to deal with this issue. And so it's not over, it continues to be. And the survivors, for as long as we're here, we know that should we have that need, they'll be there. Germany will be there, and the Claims Conference will be there, and Israel will be there. So it started at the kitchen table, but it's not over 70 years later.
Michael, this process was such a delicate one, as Roberta lays out, as Abe talks about. Take us inside of that world.
Let me answer that in a particular way. One of the reasons Nachum Goldman could negotiate and could take the chances was a bizarre reason. David Ben-Gurion faced an opposition that was immediate and faced a population that could demonstrate and that could literally storm the Knesset. Nachum Goldman, though he was elected president of this and president of that and president of the other thing, didn't face the same political pressures and could take the gambles that it took at the moment that it took it in order to push it forward. It says something remarkable that the Israelis sometimes have a little bit of difficulty of understanding, which is that structurally the fact that we have a Jewish people and an Israeli government, sometimes Jewish life is helped more by people who are operating in the name of the Jewish people rather than the legitimate, important, significant, magnificent needs of an operational government that can't represent needs because of the political matrix of the government. If you believe in the possibility of human progress, then there have been two dramatic acts of atonement in the post-Holocaust era. One incredible act of atonement is what we saw today, and the other incredible ongoing act of atonement is what happened within the Roman Catholic Church. Beginning with not beginning, but after and we now know far more, and those of you who want to see David Kurtzer's magnificent book, we now know more about the Roman Catholic Church during the Holocaust. But then you have Nostra Aetate, you have the symbolic work of St. John Paul II, who visits the Western Wall, which was once a symbol of God's departure from the Jewish people, and puts a kvittel in there. And you have and recognizes and says anti-Semitism is anti-Christian, words we had never heard from a pope. And finally, you had the incredible statement in recent months, years, by Pope Francis, which said Jews do not have to and should not convert, that we are in part of the original covenant with God. And what Germany represents in this is the possibility, and I see this most incredibly in Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel wanted to accept responsibility for the Jewish people and friendship for the Jewish state because she wanted to create a Germany that was antithetical to Nazism. She did it for the most important reason a political leader could do it, which is the self-interest of the nation she wants to create. And this, again, is an ongoing responsibility and an ongoing renunciation of the past. And the last thing I want to say is we cannot imagine, and we're living through, the scope of human dignity that is being brought to survivors throughout the world by those who refuse them the most elemental dignity when they were young, and now they can live out their years with at least a modicum of dignity, and with the support of the Jewish people, and ultimately in the act of the German people recognizing their collective responsibility. I agree with Abe, not guilt, and leaving these people the opportunity to end their days with dignity. This is a tremendous historical act of atonement, and it's also an act of enormous grace by the Jewish people, who took the gamble. And remember, they could have made a fool of these Jewish leaders. Mm-hmm. They could have destroyed them forever. But it was a tremendous act of grace for saying, we have to provide a path forward.
But it wasn't easy to be examined by German doctors, by having to petition how sick you are, how invalid you are, how disabled you are. So yes, but it was a long period where there was not, that dignity was not complete. It was very, very difficult. And yet, you know, at the end of days today, thank God it happened. Thank God for the courage. Thank God for the reconciliation.
And we have to compensate for the historical record of survivors. Because, and I'm looking at my friend Ted Comet here, whose wife gave one of the most magnificent addresses in history on the role of survivors, because the medical records will indicate to future historians disease and destruction and mental and emotional illnesses. But the record we have to provide is the record that we now understand of survivors, which is a record of resilience and character strength, an incredible ability to rebuild in the aftermath of destruction, to bring new life into the world, to bring Jewish life into the world. And it's the ultimate lesson of the Jewish people that in the aftermath of destruction, we do not accept death as the final word, but the responsibility to rebuild, to renew, to transform, and to grow.
Greg, we spoke briefly before this panel, and you mentioned how shockingly similar these negotiations are today as they were years ago.
Yeah, I think people will be surprised at the atmosphere. So the trappings are different. We focus on individual survivors to tell a story and to paint a picture, because I think 70 years ago, people understood what had happened. When we meet with the German delegation today, it's quite possible they've never met a Holocaust survivor. And so we try and humanize it as much as possible. So we may zoom into the home, where you saw some pictures there where we actually pre-COVID went into the home. And I certainly like to begin negotiation by saying, sit quietly for 15 minutes and just listen to me. That doesn't really happen. But we never negotiate in German. Most of our delegation speaks German and understands German, but we do not speak German during the negotiations. But what's really strikingly similar is how raw it is, how emotional it is. There's not a stiffness in the same way. You know, nobody smokes and we don't have lighters. We shake hands, all of that. But it's tense. It is tense. And we have a delegation of survivors. The negotiations, the actual physical negotiations, happen one day per year. But it's about 8 months of preparation where I sit with my German counterparts, Karen, our team in Germany, and we talk about survivors and their condition today and what's happened and why they don't have inherited wealth and what happened in Yash and, you know, death trains in Romania and what was it like at Babi Yar and how is it possible that survivors need so much home care today, and on and on and on, the condition of survivors. There are times when there's fist pounding. There are times when there are tears that well up, honestly, maybe on both sides. One of the scenes is Saul Kagan I think is quoted as saying, you could feel the souls of the 6 million in the room. So the truth is that Saul Kagan was my mentor. I am a student of Saul Kagan. And by the way, his daughter is here. His daughter and his niece are here. So thank you very much for being here. But because of that, I can tell you that that emotion of the responsibility, the souls of the 6 million who were murdered, and the neshamas, the needs and the souls of the survivors from around the world are with us in that room. We meet with survivors every day, and we understand what they're going through and what it means when you don't have home care, and survivor guilt for having survived, a whole range of issues. The German government doesn't necessarily understand all of that, and it's our obligation to talk about it and explain it.
I was also struck by the fact that this year is the first time that Holocaust education is a part of the agreement. And it in particular struck me at a time when 2/3 of young adults in the US are not aware that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. How much is that education going to be a part of the ongoing future of this effort?
So I think, let me just address in terms of the negotiations. I wanted to say before, when we were speaking about why this film was made now, why we felt it was important to be made now, I think the first half of the film could have been made at the 75th anniversary or the 100th anniversary of the agreements. Adenauer did this, and Nachum Goldman did that. It's historical events. The issues, the neshama of the film is how the survivors had to deal with it, what it really meant to them. And that's why it was so important that we do it now, while we could still capture that from Holocaust survivors. On that note, in talking with survivors, while we do, it used to be 25 years ago, Holocaust survivors mostly spoke to the claims conference about pensions. I'm not entitled to a pension, how do I get a pension, what can I do, etc. All those people who were not eligible from the 1950s. I think in the past decade and a half, it was about home care. I used to care for my husband, but now I can't do it anymore, and so I need a little bit of help in the home. And now even I'm the one who, my husband passed away, and now I need a little bit of help. So it was really about home care. The most common conversation that I have with Holocaust survivors today is who will remember us. I am the only link to the shtetl that existed that I came from. I remember what it was like in my town, and my grandparents. I am the last person on the planet who knows that world. And when I go, who will know? Who will remember? Who will tell us? And if it's important to a Holocaust survivor, it becomes the mandate of the claims conference. And so we began a few years ago talking to them about, even though the amount of money for compensation is increasing, the amount of money for home care and food and medicine is increasing, but we know that in a few years it won't. And so we have to start now to talk about education. And so as you mentioned, this is the first year that we just started to have an agreement with the German government on the future. What will the future look like? And the most important thing for survivors is Holocaust education, and that's where we are.
And the tragedy of our world, the absolute tragedy of our world, the shame of our world, is that Holocaust education now is more necessary, not only to remember the past, but as a tool against hatred, bigotry, racism, xenophobia. And, I have been saying for years, let me go back. When we created the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, there would have been one great ending. The ending would have been able to point to what we had just shared with the audience, and to say with visitors, and say to them, this could not happen in our world. Look how stupid, look how ridiculous, look how shameful, look how evil 20th century humanity was. This could not be part of our world. The shame of our world is this is more urgent. It's more urgent not only to protect Jews against anti-Semitism, but to protect a variety of people from the quality and the quantity, the magnitude and also the tools of hatred that we see in our world today. I wish I were irrelevant, and what drives me every day is the fact that what we're doing in remembering the Holocaust is ever more urgent, not only to remember the past, but to shape the future.
Go ahead.
I think the question you raise is the ignorance. Well, first, Americans don't teach history. We certainly don't teach geography, but we don't teach history. Our history ends, I don't know where, but it's certainly, and World War II is 2 or 3 pages somewhere in high school, and the Holocaust maybe gets a paragraph or a sentence. So there's absolute ignorance. I don't think it's not malevolent, it's just, that's what it is. Then you have Holocaust denial. Then you have Holocaust trivialization. That's conscious. That's out there. But I think it's even worse than all of that. This all comes from hate, from anti-Semitism. What is anti-Semitism? What is racism? What is It's lies. It's a lie you talk and say about somebody else. We used to have an antidote for lies. It was called the truth. Oh, you laugh. You cry. There is no truth. We've lost truth in the last 5, 10 years. That's why the Paley Center is so important. That's why teaching Holocaust is so important. We've lost the truth. And how, if you don't have the vehicle of truth and media, okay, which is another subject, how do you answer these lies? So Holocaust denial is growing. There is ignorance. It is a lie. We don't have the elements. We don't have the tools. So it's much worse than it was. And we have to be very creative and more creative. And Michael, you've been trying with its animation and its TikTok. It's, and this, you want the greatest problem in terms of, here it is. Okay, it's a boon, but it's a disaster. So we have to be more creative. We have to fight it and fight it hard. And thank you, Roberta, because that's another vehicle.
It's the only vehicle.
Okay.
I'd like to make an argument that the money that the German government is providing for Holocaust education can best be spent through films. Books are great. I mean, in the future, books are fantastic. Thank you for all your books.
And they're banned.
Well, they could get banned. But books are essential. Universities are essential. But films reach people on a level that nothing else does. The combination of sound and music and story and imagery, it's the most powerful medium that we have, and especially to reach young people. And I think that in the future, when we don't have the survivors to go to classrooms to tell their stories, then we'll have them on film to tell their stories that way. So that's my pitch. Greg,
I got it. I got the pitch.
I'll be calling you tomorrow to talk about that.
You can see she's so convincing. This is the 3rd film that we've done with Roberta, but I wanted to say this. I think that it's the inspiration of survivors, right? The whole idea that a survivor, that a person went through what they went through, so horrific, to have come out of that with any sense of hope is just shocking to me. I think, I mean, I can't imagine, but I would only think that I would have lost all hope, all desire to live, all interest in humanity. And yet survivors say all the time, our past shouldn't define our grandchildren's future. We have to make the world a better place for Jews, fighting anti-Semitism, but for all people. It's that whole issue. And that's the lesson. To this end, we are doing, by the way, the Claims Conference is doing a range of things. Just yesterday, there was an influencer, if people know what that is, on a TikTok, a person who makes TikTok. She does dance videos, which are really fun and really interesting. She went, it turns out coincidentally that her grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And she went back to Auschwitz and we taped it. And it appeared actually on Good Morning America.
Yes, it did.
And this one that we funded, this one TikTok, had over 1 million views just in the first 48 hours. So we are hopeful. We remain hopeful.
Golda Meir, former Prime Minister of Israel, once said, Jews don't have the luxury to be pessimists. Survivors don't have the luxury to be pessimists. And that's why we survived, God knows for what reason. So we take upon ourselves a responsibility not only to bear witness, but to be optimists. Because if we survived all what we survived, then there's got to be a hope for the future. And I think that's the burden we've been given as part of survival. And so use it, use it.
I think also the Luxembourg agreements, for a moment of hope, I feel like if the German government, the new Israeli government, and the newly formed Claims Conference could all gather around this chasm of this rift in humanity, this rift in civilization that the Holocaust represents, and find a way to speak to each other, that there could be hope for other intractable problems in the world. And I don't need to name, which problems there are. Everybody here would have another problem that this could be, could it be an example for. So I think that it is ultimately very hopeful. And the model of the power for healing for both the victim and the victimizer in reparations is a very good example. And I think we could use more of that kind of behavior in the world. They proved that it was possible and that it was effective.
And I think your work proves how possible and effective the media and storytelling can be in combating anti-Semitism.
We hope so. That's where we get out of bed in the morning. I don't know who the we is. I guess filmmakers, writers, producers, journalists of all kinds. Yeah.
But we have to be. Let me say a dissonant note, and then a word in honor of our host. We have to be careful because lots of people see this Holocaust material and are transformed and moved by it. And some people see this material and are attracted to it. And it's not for naught, and this is the opposite of denial, there is the desire to repeat. It's not for naught that we have in our world people who wear a T-shirt, 6MWE, 6 million wasn't enough. And we have in our world somebody who walks into the Capitol with a sweatshirt, Auschwitz staff member. This is enormously potent material, and this is the tribute to our host. I spend a lot of my volunteer time on Claims Conference business. Claims Conference began by having an education committee and a scholarship committee. It then added, after '93 onward, it added a exhibitions committee for museums. It then recently, maybe the last 5 years, added a film committee. And now, if you let Greg tell you what else it has to add a social media dimension. Because the world, as Abe took out his phone, the world is social media. And Abe has more power in his phone, a little bit newer than mine, has more power in his phone than what we had to set off the atomic bomb. I mean, we have an instantaneous communication, and that communication leads to lots of people being engaged and transformed by this material, and a segment of the population the world population, that is attracted to this material and turned on by it to repeat. And that's a word of caution that we have to take and we have to understand. And someday we're going to have to comprehend what is it in the presentation of the material that we can do that makes sure that it's 99.99 that find it transformative, and the most minimal imaginable that find it attractive.
Well, it's also a matter of the algorithms and how these devices and applications are used to incite more anger as opposed to making it transformative, which the vast majority of people would feel if they were fed the information in a way that wasn't encouraging of that. So I think that's a big part, maybe something to think about also as we think about education and going forward in this fight against anti-Semitism, and to inform people to understand how these major corporations are using their power, not for a specific cause, but for the bottom line.
Yeah, I would say misusing their power, amplifying the wrong message. But I will tell you a story, is that there's a survivor that I'm close with, whose name is Sonia, who was actually supposed to be here tonight. And I called her up once and I asked her to speak at a school, because the school had asked me, and I tried to connect her with the school. And she said yes. And then she started to tell me that 3 nights before she speaks, and she speaks pretty regularly, she can't sleep, because she's so anxious about the questions they're going to ask and how she's going to tell the story and reliving the horror. And for 3 nights after she's in a school, she can't sleep because of the anxiety. I tell that story because I think that is an inspiration. If she, and I said to her, Sonia, you know, maybe you shouldn't do it so much. Maybe you should cut back a little bit. And she said, I owe it to my parents. I owe it to my parents. So I don't sleep for a few nights. This is what she has to endure because she feels it's so important based on what happened to her and the murder of her parents, et cetera. If she has the strength at 90 years old and weighing, you know, about 80 pounds, if she can do that, we cannot relent. No matter what problem we have, and against big companies and profits and you know, people who just are crazy people, and whatever challenges we have, there certainly are a lot of them, we cannot relent. You know, we always say survivors were abandoned in their youth, their communities, their governments, society, where they were abandoned. They cannot be abandoned now, and we will never abandon this struggle either.
I wonder, as we leave here tonight, we can go down the line, what each of you hopes this will accomplish, and any advice that you would like to leave with the audience of things that people can be doing in their daily lives to lift up these stories and to fight anti-Semitism and to make sure that truth exists.
To go back to your previous comment, I don't think we can do it here, but we have to encourage other people to do it. Mm-hmm. We need to find a balance between freedom of speech and civility. It's very big, yeah. Because even those are out there, you know, buying companies and talking about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, unfettered, is very dangerous. You know, freedom is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So there is this issue of freedom of speech versus civility. We need to find that balance, because if we don't find a balance, we're going to be dealing with algorithms way beyond. But to specifically to your question, I think all of us are survivors. Maybe not first dimension survivors. If Hitler had his way, he'd be here. So we all survived. And so not only we, the survivors, have this responsibility, you all have that responsibility to stand up, to have your voice heard when you see anti-Semitism, hear it, racism, prejudice, bigotry, not to shirk away from it. What happened recently, the Kanye West situation is ugly and hideous and horrific, but it also provides me with a sense of hope. It took a while, but all of a sudden, a lot of good, decent people are speaking up. Mm-hmm. Corporations are saying no. He was thrown out of a business office. But that's the message. We can all make a difference. And maybe I'm going overboard, but no. When I was old enough to figure out, or try to figure out what I survived, I then had to figure out, okay, so what's my job? What's my role? What's my responsibility? And I had a choice. And the choice was to tell how terrible it was, how horrific it was, how evil people are, or to focus on the good. And I decided in my message of survival is not the evil, not Auschwitz, but that they were good people. I survived because there was a Catholic woman who risked her life for 4 years to save me and protect me because I was another human being. I've learned in my study, and this is the master of the history of the Holocaust, that wherever and whenever and however good people stood up, Jews lived, gays lived, gypsies lived, Catholics lived. So that to me is the lesson of the Holocaust. Not that people can do evil. Hey, we know that. What's more important is that people can make a difference if they stand up and act. There was one Bulgaria. They weren't perfect. They didn't save Macedonian Jews. But they saved 50,000 of their Jews. Can you imagine if every country just saved their own Jews, like Denmark did? We wouldn't have a Holocaust. So, yeah, that's the message. The message is you can make a difference. You can make a difference. You can save lives. You certainly can prevent pain and anguish, but you can also save lives. That's what bullying is all about. That's what hate is all about. So yeah, that's our message for you and for your children and grandchildren, to take the responsibility as if you all were survivors and stand up and say, no, no, not acceptable.
Well, I'm sure there are some other great ideas on this stage, but
all we have to say is amen.
Exactly. Amen. Thank you, Abe. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Greg, for this excellent conversation, and congratulations on your film, Roberta.
Thank you very much.